meringue live stream. Today I'm going to be making meringue foxes and meringue deer for a woodland animal camping set of meringues that I'm going to be selling at my local farmer's market this Saturday. So for the foxes, I start by piping one mound, then piping another mound on top of it. You can do it in two separate pieces like I did there, or you can pipe one, ease off pressure but keep it connected to the bottom ring, and then pipe that second mound so it is continuous. Either way works just fine. Kind of like piping little snowmen. And now let's give them some ears. So this is a dark brown that I'm using. Could use black too, but I like the way the brown looks. All right, and so for the ears, you just kind of put it at the top of the head, squeeze with light pressure, and I like to wiggle it back and forth, and then kind of ease off pressure and taper off at the end to make a point. And I don't like to make them too thin or too tall, because the thinner they are and the taller they get, the easier it is to break them off after baking. And you can kind of play around with the ear positioning, whatever looks most fox-like, more on the tops of the heads maybe. And I'm using that same brown color. I'm going to stick it into the body of the fox. Even pressure and then ease off to make a little foot. And depending on how far you stick the piping bag into the body, you can kind of see there's a gradient that happens, which can be really cool. But if you don't want that effect, just start a little bit away from the body and start piping from there. And I've noticed my little guys have a tendency for their legs to float off the ground. If you want them flush, that's fine. You can pipe them right against the baking mat so they're flat on the bottoms. I have noticed that when I'm doing that, if the legs are not super well attached, or if they're a little bit thin, they want to stay with the silicone baking mat after baking when you remove them, so their legs can snap off. So it might look a little silly for their legs to be a little bit floating above the mat, but it can also be easier to remove without losing any. Alright, so there's their little legs, and then I'm going to start at the base of the neck here, light pressure, and then just gradually increase pressure to make little thicker hands, kind of a teardrop shape. And then as I ease off, I kind of do this swirling motion to make it a little bit smoother on the ends. And by starting at the base of the head or the neck, you can kind of hide the arms a little bit better so maybe they don't look quite as stuck on. Piping a little bit into that crease. And you could pipe their hands in all sorts of poses if you wanted. You could put them off to the side. You could have them maybe raise their hands and brace them against the sides of the head so they don't break off. Could have them reach straight out. Could even put them kind of piping them straight down so it looks like they're resting their feet on the ground. More of a sitting pose. Lots of options. Now I'm going to give them little muzzles, little snouts. So I start by piping a circle, kind of wiggle it around to get it circular, and then I kind of pull the tip out to form a point, not using a lot of pressure, just using the surface tension of the meringue on the bag to make that shape, kind of a cone shape. And I'll give them some little faces, some eyes and noses. So this is a black meringue that I reserved earlier on in the whipping process, so it's a little less firmly whipped than the rest of my meringue, which makes it go on a little bit smoother for face details. That way it doesn't stick out quite so much from the faces, and it can be easier to draw on those details and make them look smooth. So these are just little dots here, using not a lot of pressure so that I can control the amount of meringue that comes out. Hi, Catherine. And then once I get all the little faces on, I'm going to spin them around and give them little fluffy tails. So we'll see. I don't know if I trim the piping tip as big as I need to for these. Yep, that'll do. So I like to pipe them at an angle to give them some character. Oh my gosh, you broke your arm. How'd you do that? It's painful. So this is kind of a diagonal teardrop shape. Consistent pressure, and then you ease off and drag to the side there. And then I like to give them a little fluffy white tip at the tail. Oh no! Did I backbend and landed on it wrong? That's no fun, I'm sorry. And for these little white tips, I put them inside the tail and pull out. That'll give it kind of a gradient, or you can just put right at the tip if you want less of a gradient. I have been lucky enough never to have broken anything. I don't know how I managed that. Very grateful though. All right, and now I'm gonna move on to the deer, and they're gonna be male deer, so they'll have antlers. So same thing as with the foxes, you pipe a little blob, pipe another little smooth blob on top, and you can play around with the different sizes. You can make the bottom much larger, and that'll make it a little more stable so that hopefully the head doesn't tilt to the side and start leaning. You can make the body and head the same size. You could try and make the body smaller and the head bigger. See how that works if your meringue is strong enough. And then sometimes you can do this little technique where you kind of pull up and it's more of a cone shape, and then draw that little head on there. That was probably the wrong design for the wrong color. And it's not looking right. Okay, and then I'm going to give them limbs. So, same thing as the fox. I put the piping tip inside the meringue. Steady pressure, then ease off pressure as you get to the end. Legs are kind of floating a bit again. And you can play around with the leg width too. Like you could do some where their legs are more front facing. Doing a little stretch. Every time I make the deer, I struggle with the color. They always end up being this weird flesh color, and I think I want them to be just a little bit more brown, maybe a little bit more gray. Right now they just kind of look like little naked babies. Alright, same thing with the arms. Position the tip at the base of the neck. Put little teardrops. Or maybe like little naked mole rats or hamsters or something. They're a little creepy before I give them antlers, I gotta say. I'm going to give them some ears too. So I put the piping bag at the top of the head kind of at an angle, and I'm just going to give them these a little bit smaller ears than the foxes. And I find I kind of like the ears to go out to the side a little bit more. And this will help us with the antlers, giving them something to rest on. So hopefully they're a little bit more resistant to the ears and antlers snapping off. And same as the fox, I'm going to give them little white muzzles. Not going to make them quite as pointy. Maybe not a perfect circle, maybe a little bit of an oval, so I like to do this little left to right motion. And you can kind of play around with the snout and how big or small you want it. Give them some faces. And I like the noses to be a little bit wider too, maybe not a perfect circle. Dot the eyes with gentle pressure just above the snout. These could look like little, I don't know, some kind of canine, little chihuahuas or almost kind of similar to those foxes before adding the antlers. All about the antlers. I'll add those now. So for the antlers, I start at the base of the ear and then light pressure so you can control it. I do this little angle upwards and then I put it back in about halfway and then just do a little spike there. So it's not actually that much like a deer antler, I don't think. It reminds me more of a moose antler. But we're working pretty tiny here, so anything we can do just to suggest that they're antlers, I think is good enough. You could just give them little spikes if they're younger deer. I'm pretending they're older. And I feel like the pointier I make them, the more they look like deer and less like moose, so maybe I'll err on that side. Although if you make them too thin, again, you risk them breaking. So it's a bit of a trade-off. Then let's give them some little hooves. That's going to make them look more deer-like. So I push the tip of the piping bag into the ends of the feet and the little arms and just pipe a little dot in there. Just kind of trying to blend that in. So they went from naked babies to hopefully looking more like deer. And for the last little detail, I'm going to turn them around and give them little white tails. So being careful not to hit the fox, I start at the base with consistent pressure, then taper off to a point, making a little raindrop shape. And if I wanted to get really detailed, I'd maybe stripe the bag and make one side that ivory color and the other side white. So there's our first row of foxes and deer. Make another row of foxes now. So we'll pipe our little snowman bodies. I love this color orange. It's kind of a pumpkin-y orange. I used Chef Master, I don't know what the orange is called, maybe Sunset Orange, and Chef Master No Taste Red, so that it's not bitter, just a little bit. And I use Chef Master Buckeye Brown. So that the orange is a little too bright, so I like to soften it a little bit with the red and the brown, make it a little more earthy. And I'll get the ears on there. Again, just moving kind of left to right as I ease off pressure and pull the meringue to a point. They could easily look like cats. Hopefully the colors distinguish them enough as foxes. But with a few tweaks, you could turn this design into a cat. Give it a little squiggly tail or something. And let's give them their legs. Steady pressure, then ease off. A little swirly motion to smooth. Try to get them the same size, but sometimes one leg is a little bit bigger than the other. And the arms, kind of blocking them there, and I starting at the base of the neck and then squeezing downwards. Maybe if I just lower this angle a little bit, we'll get a little bit more focus on there. We'll see how that works. Okay, then we'll give them some muzzles. Using white, making a little circle, and then pulling towards me. Maybe give them a little swirl to smooth it out to make a short cone shape. And got away from me a little bit, so I wiggled around until I got it into a shape I liked better. All right, and then we'll give them noses. Pin my piping back a little bit. Okay. So gentle pressure for those little eye and nose dots. That softer black meringue. I like to do a variation of these in winter sometimes and give them little scarves and hats, like they're bundling up for the cold weather. Usually like to give them blue or green so the colors really pop. And there's the contrast. All right, now let's give them some floofy tails. Kind of like that angle. Go. See, although maybe I want to do it this way. It's easier for me to pipe at this slant this way. So again, kind of a diagonal teardrop shape. Starting at the base, following along the body, and easing off pressure into a point. So that's maybe where you'll spend your time focusing on smoothing things out. And real quick, I gotta show you guys this little thing I made. We're gonna do a side-by-side comparison here. Oops, let's just shake the world there. I'll be right back. I was playing around with polymer clay the other day, and I was trying to make these foxes, but like a polymer clay version. So it's not perfect. They don't look exactly alike, but I tried. Still getting used to it. But my goal is to someday make a little set that looks like meringues that I can just keep as little decorative figurines. And making the bodies of the deer the same way we made the bodies of the foxes. You know what? I'm gonna do the ears and muzzles and faces and antlers first so they don't look quite so creepy at the beginning. antlers. That will make them significantly less creepy looking. So just kind of piping a line alongside the ears. When I get to the tip of the ear, I kind of do a little angle upwards. And then I do another little spike about halfway through that antler. And reinforcing it like that just makes it a little bit sturdier. One more. Okay. I give them some faces now. Kind of an oval muzzle there. This one's leaning a little bit. He looks like he wants to tell his friend a secret over here. And I'll give him some noses and eyes. And actually, I even think this design is pretty cute like this without adding the limbs. I like to add them for a little bit more detail, but this would be a cute stopping point too if you didn't want to get that detailed. All right, now we'll go back and add the limbs. Some little legs. That turned out to be a weird looking leg. Just kind of smooth that out a little bit. Much better. And kind of like the foxtail, you don't have to worry about getting the ends of the feet super smooth right now because we're gonna cap them with little hooves. They look like little board game pieces without their legs. And then we'll touch the tip to the base of the neck. Arms out there. And you could probably make the arms a little bit shorter than with the foxes since they're gonna have hooves. But kind of a personal preference, whatever aesthetic you like. And if a little bit of meringue gets out of place, then you just smooth it right back with the tip of the piping bag. All right, get their hooves on. I'm just gonna pull this up a little bit. Go. And hooves. And again, I'm just sticking the piping bag into the foot a little bit. Creates a smoother transition usually. And the last little touch on these guys is their little white fluffy tails. Maybe I'll spin them this way. Start on this side and do a little teardrop shape. Being a little careful of the foxes behind them, because you can absolutely take a face off if you're not careful. And there we go, a little white-tailed deer there. All right, let's do another row of foxes. So again, starting with kind of a snowman body. The head on top should be either a little bit smaller or the same size as the body for stability. And we'll get some ears on there. A little back and forth motion. No pressure, just using the tip to kind of shape it into a point. I like to try and get them about the same size and angle. But if you're playing around with different expressions, it could be cute to put the ears at different angles too. Make them look kind of curious or confused. Put them closer to the top of the head, maybe they look a little bit more alert. Lots of subtle little things you can do. And let's give them some legs. I'll give them some snouts. Pointy bit over there. I'm trying to smooth out. There we go. And some little faces. Thank you. I'm glad you like them. I must like this design because I come back to it every year, sometimes multiple times a year. I think they're really cute in the summer around Memorial Day or the 4th of July when a lot of people are out camping. Just makes me think of woodland animals. Maybe I'll do it this way. But I also think they're really cute in the fall. All right, little diagonal teardrop shapes there. Again, not worrying too much about getting them smooth because we're just gonna put little white tips on them, and that's where we should focus our energy. It's a little hard to see. There we go. And there we go. Another row of foxes done. How well do these travel? Depends on how you're traveling. I would say if you're shipping them, probably not well, because you never know how the postal service is gonna handle them. And the more they rattle around, the more the pieces will maybe break off because meringue is pretty brittle and delicate. But if you're driving in the car or something, even bringing them as carry-on as a plane, as long as you have them in a container where they're not moving around too much, they should be fine. The one thing I always tend to think of is if you're going to somewhere dry to humid, they will get sticky pretty fast. I had a friend who took them on a vacation to Hawaii, and they still tasted good and everything, but they were sticking to each other and sticking to their fingers. So that's something to be mindful of. All right, let's give the deer some ears. Maybe I'll make them a little bit bigger this time. And that'll help them brace the antlers and also stay more visible when we put the antlers on there. Although this makes them look a little bit more like Dobby from Harry Potter. At least at first. Like little goblins, little elves, something. And we'll do the antlers, kind of turn up at the end of the ear. Put a little spike in the middle. And we'll do that with each one. Go. Give them some little snouts in white for some contrast. And some little noses and eyes. And you can play around a little bit with the spacing, how high above the snout you want them to be, how close together you want them to be. You can get some different looks that way. Suppose I end up making deer about twice a year too, because in the winter I'd make them reindeer. And I'll give every 9th one a red nose for Rudolph. And I think I use a little bit darker brown when I'm doing them in the winter. And the reason I'm not today is because I want to make sure they contrast enough with the brown bears I made yesterday. And I think these are going to look really cute, all these colors together with the light brown deer, the darker brown bears, the black bears, the orange foxes. And then some green trees will be a really nice contrast. Some earthy green. And some little campfires. It's like a little paper towel fiber on the tip of this. Let me get that off of there. Oh, my hand is blocking that completely. There we go. Still kind of blurry though. When I switch to a new tray, maybe I'll raise the camera. Maybe that'll give us all a better view. And last little detail, the white tails. So being mindful of the fox behind. Make a little teardrop shape. And you wouldn't have to be quite as mindful if you spaced them further apart. It's real blurry back there. But I like to fit as many on a sheet as I can. All right, I'm gonna pop those in the food dehydrator for storage, and I'm gonna grab another tray. And since we ended with deer, we'll start with foxes. So we're gonna try that camera angle and see if that helps with the blurriness. I'm just gonna pull this up a little bit. That's where I like it. And we'll start with some little orange snowman shapes again. And we'll give them some ears. Kind of going back and using the piping bag to shape them if they're not quite how I want them to be. All right, add some legs. All right, let's give these guys some little faces. We'll start with a muzzle. faces, noses, and mouths. Eyes just a little bit above the muzzles there. Go, and we'll finish up with some tails for that row. So we've got a little bit of the sideways teardrop shape. Looks like some of the meringue might have dried in the bag, so I'm gonna clean the tip a little bit. And add those little white tips. There we go, another row of foxes. We'll switch back and add another row of deer. And we'll give them some ears. Starting out looking like goblins. But that will change. They won't stay looking that way. And we'll add the antlers along the ears for stability. And make a little couple spikes going up. Alright, and their muzzles, little ovals. pieces. I'll give them some legs. And back to the arms. And if there's a little air bubble, I'll just smooth it out with the tip of the piping bag. There we go, and then I'm going to give them some hooves, which will make them a little bit more like deer. And then we'll spin them around, add some tails, trying not to hit the fox in the face with the piping bag. And there we go, another row of deer down. So back to foxes. Getting towards the end of this pastry bag. So then I'll swap out to the other one I have on standby. Another full one out of this. Let's see. Yes, we can. And I always have a bag full with a coupling attachment there. So I can just swap it in real quick. Few less things to clean by doing it that way. Ooh. See if I can smooth this guy out. okay, because we need samples for the farmer's market too, so any of them that don't turn out perfect enough to make the set, little samples for people who want to try before they buy. And the weather app keeps going back and forth on me, where it says it's going to be clear every day except Saturday when I'm doing the farmer's market, but then some days it looks like it's going to be clear, so fingers crossed it doesn't rain. I love the rain, but it's just not as fun to set up outside in the rain. And I don't typically offer meringue samples when it's raining because the moisture in the air makes them so sticky. And so people end up getting their hands all messy, and it's just not quite the texture experience I want them to have if they're trying my meringues for the first time. Plenty of other things to sample, like macarons and cake, though. I've been really excited this market season to kind of go into each market with a theme. And so I always have my base macaron flavors. I have like 5 core ones. And then I have some meringues, whatever is left over from the week before, because they're so shelf stable. And then a new design. So this week's theme is kind of woodland and camping. And to kind of match the cake to that theme, I thought I'd do a oat flour chiffon cake with triple berry jam and a whipped frosting. Because when I think of camping and I think of summer, a lot of times I think of picking berries. And I make my triple berry jam with strawberry, blueberry, and raspberry. I love that combination together. And then I think with the oat flour in the chiffon cake, it's going to have a little bit of nuttiness to it. So at first I was thinking like, maybe I'll do triple berry, triple nut, like do some pecans and some almonds, maybe some pistachios or peanuts. But I figured I'd go simple and do the triple berry. I love adding toasted chopped nuts to my cake fillings, but there are quite a few people who are allergic to nuts, so I try to take a break from that when I can to give people some options. gonna spin them around and give them tails. Kind of sassy and off to the side a little bit. And add some little white tips. Make sure they look extra foxy. This one's kind of like a Michelin Man fox going on back here. Alright, do another row of deer. Same thing, we'll see how many I can get from this pastry bag before I need to switch to the other one. Maybe one more. One more, yay! Okay. And then swap it over to this one. Whoop, got a little mess happening already. And if there's a little air bubble in the top, I just smooth it out with the piping tip. Okay, now I'm going to do it in a little different order. Make them look real creepy at first. But this is probably the more efficient way to do it. Just sticking with one color for all the details I can before switching to another one. A little bubble in there I'm trying to smooth out. Alright, and then we'll add some arms. And at this point they're starting to look like weird little naked babies. One of my favorite video game series growing up was Tomb Raider. And in Tomb Raider not Last Revelation, Chronicles, there's kind of a flashback level where she's a teenager and on this island, I think in Ireland. And there's these little imps and they kind of look like this. And they always creeped me out when I was a kid. It's kind of these like weird little flesh color monsters waddling around. And then I'm going to add ears, and then they're going to look kind of like little naked baby goblins. Give them just slightly different ears, and maybe they'd look like naked mole rats. Kind of shaping that ear a little bit. There we go. thought maybe I'd alternate doing bucks and does, but they just look so creepy without antlers to suggest they're deer. Although I guess we'll try. We'll try the hooves first and see. I don't know. I'm still not liking that. I feel like they just need the antlers. Without the antlers, honestly, they'd kind of look like little pigs. If I just made them maybe more pink, and instead of these dark brown hooves, maybe give them some slightly darker pink hooves. It's gonna be cute piggies. Alright, give them some antlers. Following the ear so that they're a little stronger. Adding some little spikes, one at the end, one halfway through. Give them some faces. So now they're not looking quite so creepy. They're not looking like naked babies. They're not looking like goblins. Looking more like animals. Alright, give them some noses. Okay, and then I'm going to spin them around for some tails. It's a little bit more room between the foxes and deers for this row, but I'm still having to be kind of careful not to knock into the fox snouts there. It's really slow. There we go. And I'll get back to another row of foxes. Gonna maybe move them forward a little bit so there's a little more space. I want to fit one more row of deers on here so it doesn't have to be quite that tight. Looks like there's going to be plenty of room. And their little pointy ears. legs again. Back to their faces. Little cone-shaped snout. And scoot them this way, add some more tails. Little white tips. There we go. And for the last little row of this sheet, we will do deer. And then after that, I can probably get almost a whole other sheet of foxes and deer. And again, these little guys start off looking so creepy, but we're just gonna trust the process. It's all gonna come together when we add the hooves and the antlers. The faces help too. And I'm gonna maybe make these a little bit more diagonal rather than going out to the side. And I'm making a little bigger because I feel like some of the detail gets lost when you add the antlers. Don't look quite as much as like little goblins when you make them at this angle. Okay, and then we'll add the antlers. And look at that. Amazing what a difference those little details make. Much less creepy now. Give them some silly little faces. And before I get another tray, I'm going to finish off with some little tails. All right, I'm going to put this sheet in the food dehydrator for holding, and then I will come back with a new tray. Just trying to be really careful when putting them in the food dehydrator, because the clearance is a little narrow. I don't want to be taking anybody's ears or antlers off. All right, another row of foxes. Smooth out that little air bubble. And give them some ears. Camera always has a little bit of trouble focusing when I'm on this back row. And it's probably just getting my hands in there and throwing it off. But it usually gets better as I get further down the sheet. Oh, thank you. I'm always excited when people want to learn. If you're just starting out, I have a step-by-step how to make animal and character meringues video linked in the description of this stream. If you've already made meringue before, I can kind of walk through what I'm doing. Maybe I'll start on the next row. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask. So for those who might have missed it earlier, I'm going to walk through kind of step by step how I make the deer meringues. So I start with piping a little mound, and then without even really removing it from the bottom meringue, another mound. And I like to make the body either a little bit bigger than the head or the same size, just so that it doesn't lean over, because gravity will do its work here. So these end up looking like little snowmen. So you can do a little swirl and do that. Kind of take the piping tip away after you pipe the first mound and then put it back on the second mound. Or you can do kind of one continuous motion, steady pressure, ease off, steady pressure again. But the result is pretty much the same either way. And then we'll give them some legs. So I stick the piping tip into the body, steady pressure, then slowly ease off to kind of taper it. And I do this little swirling motion at the end to kind of smooth it out, which is not as important with these deer because we're going to put little hooves at the end. So again, just putting the piping tip in the body, easing off pressure as you pull away, and a little swirly motion to end it. There we go. And we'll just repeat that for the rest of the row. And I'm piping the legs just a little bit off of the baking sheet so that when they're done baking, they're less likely to snap off. I've lost a lot of legs trying to remove them afterwards. Let's see here, and then we'll put the base of the piping tip, or the piping tip at the base of the neck. Gentle pressure at first, then increase it a little bit for the arms. And when you start at the base of the neck like that, just kind of helps everything blend a little bit easier. And as we get towards the end of the row, I'll rotate and show you kind of another way you can do it. So this is the other way, is you can start where you want the hands to end, stir to your pressure, and then kind of ease off towards the neck in a long teardrop shape. So if it's easier for you to move your hand in that way, that's another option. Sometimes it just kind of depends on where you're positioned relative to your meringues. So next I'm going to pipe some ears, so I stick the tip kind of in the head, and then consistent pressure at first, then tapering off and just pulling the meringue to a point. So you can do them kind of at a 45-degree angle like that, or we can give them kind of like dobby ears. Make them look a little bit more like little goblins. and make the ears a little bit lower on the head and going out to the side. Whatever aesthetic you like. You can experiment with making them longer or shorter. And then I'm gonna make the antlers and the hooves. So start at the base of the ear, and then you just pipe a thin line following the ear. Do kind of a little angle upwards, and another little spike in the middle. And piping them against the ear like this makes them a little bit stronger, because small, fine, brittle details like the ears and the legs can snap off really easily after breaking. So this just helps reinforce it a little bit. Still no guarantee. You do have to handle these with care, but every little bit counts. Like to push the piping tip into the edge of the leg there, and then apply pressure so you get kind of a smooth transition between leg and hoof. And I think these little details, the antlers and the hooves, are really what makes them look like deer. They could easily be another animal without these details. All right, and then the muzzles. So I take the white pastry bag of meringue, and I like to make kind of an oval shape, although you could do a little circle if you wanted. Circle, you would just apply firm pressure like so. For an oval, you kind of do this back and forth, left and right motion to widen it a little bit. And we'll add some faces, so starting with the nose. Very light pressure. This is a softer meringue. I reserved a little bit of meringue when it just got to maybe medium peaks. Set it aside and colored it black. And I like to do that for the face details because it's easier to draw them on. That said, you do have to be pretty careful when you're piping them on because they can spread and bleed if it's too soft. So I reserved some, then kept whipping, and that's what all the other colors are made of, is something between a medium and a stiff peak. Not quite stiff peak, but almost there. And then we gotta give them some tails. So being mindful of the fox back here, start at the base, firm pressure, then ease off to make kind of a teardrop shape. And then we'll walk through the foxes one more time. So same thing, the foxes have kind of a snowman body. One mound there, lift and another mound, or steady pressure, ease off, steady pressure without separating from the meringue, and they look pretty much the same. Or you can steady pressure, no pressure, pull up a little bit, steady pressure again, and then a little flick at the end to make the top of the head a little more smooth. And there are times where maybe you don't want the head smooth. Like if you're making little duckies, sometimes it's cute to leave a little swirl. Adds a little bit of character. All right, and then we'll add the ears. So I put it kind of at a 45-degree angle on the head and do this left and right motion while applying light pressure. And then I ease off, and then you're almost using no pressure and just pulling the meringue into a point with the piping bag. So really you're using the firmer pressure to form kind of a thicker base, and then pulling to make it a little triangle. And this is a feature that works well if your meringue is just a little bit softer than stiff peaks, because it'll flow into itself a little bit better and blend. But you don't want it too soft or it'll just melt down. You do want it stiff enough to where it can hold a point. There we go, and then we'll add the legs, same as the deer. Put it in the base of the body, firm pressure, then ease off to taper. You can stick the piping tip directly into the body and it'll kind of create this gradient, which is nice. Or you can hold the piping tip so it's not actually touching the body, then start piping, and you get more of a clean edge there. So both valid options. I tend to like the gradient one, partly because it helps reinforce the legs. They might not break off quite as easy. Still have to be careful with them, but it does help. And then for the arms, again, starting at that crease where the head and the body meet to kind of hide some of that meringue, make it look a little less stuck on. Start with really gentle pressure and then increase a little bit as you get towards the hands. Try and get my camera to focus. And you could use black, but I just used kind of a really dark brown because I liked how it looked with this orange. And I think this dye will darken up a little bit with time and baking, so it might even end up a little bit darker than that, which I would be okay with. Puts it closer to that black you typically see or think of when you think of foxes. All right, and then I'm going to give them some faces similar to the deer, but I'm going to make their snouts a little more circular, and then I'm going to do steady pressure, ease off, and pull into more of a cone shape. So steady pressure for the mound, and then you could actually stop with the pressure and pull a little bit towards the end. So you want a little bit of pressure as you're pulling away, and then you want to ease off completely. give them some faces. Starting with noses. Again, this is a softer meringue that I colored black to make sure I could get those face details to blend a little bit more, not stick out so much and protrude from the rest of the meringue, because I want them to look more drawn on than like a separate piece. And they still will have some dimension and volume, but they're just a little bit more subtle. And we'll turn, give them some little foxy tails. So I like to hold my piping bag at a 45-degree angle, firm pressure at the base, then ease off and pull into this little diagonal teardrop shape. It's like sideways raining. See if I can get a little closer here. And you don't have to worry about the tails being too smooth yet, because there's one more step. And stick the piping bag into the end of the tail. Very gentle pressure just towards the beginning, and then you pull the meringue, and that's how you get these little white tips on the foxtails. And you can make these tails as big as you want. I made them a little bit small. And I recommend piping them along the sides of their body so that they don't snap off. So another row of foxes down. We'll do another row of deer. See if we can get one more full row, maybe a little bit more. Start off with a little flesh snowman. Gross. Makes me realize snowmen are just like snow golems, aren't they? Some little arms. And some ears. Actually kind of remind me of the sprites from early Pokemon games. for like Nidoran and Rhydon. They're all kind of the same little mushy teddy bear pixel sprites. And some antlers following the ears. Give them some little hooves. This meringue is starting to get softer, which makes it a little bit easier to work with in some ways. Breaks down too much, that won't be the case. And you don't want it to be too soft because the colors can run when it's baking. Alright. Add their little muzzles, little back and forth motion to make them oval. Their noses and eyes. Watch out, little fox. There we go. All right, another row of foxes. Oh, let's see, I might just barely get 2 more foxes. There we go. So I think this will be our last row. And after I finish these little guys off, I'll put them in the food dehydrator with the other ones. And I will set it for 3 hours at 165 degrees Fahrenheit. And then after those 3 hours, the alarm goes off and I let them cool down completely in the food dehydrator before taking them out and packaging them in airtight containers, food storage containers. And then eventually I package them into sets when everything in the set is done. package them into deli containers, usually 10 pieces per container. So these ones will get packaged with brown bears, black bears, some green trees, and a campfire. All meringues. And I'll be making the trees and campfires tomorrow. Be a little bit of a shorter stream because the trees are super easy. If you have a kind of star piping tip, you can crank them out pretty quick. But it might be fun for people to tune in and kind of see that technique. And if you don't have a food dehydrator, which a lot of people don't, your oven will work perfectly. I used to bake mine in my oven at 200 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 hours. Same thing, let them cool down in the oven with the oven door closed till the oven and the meringues are both cooled to room temperature. Then open the door, take them out, and put them in an airtight container. And the main reason I use a food dehydrator is meringues take a long time in the oven, and I didn't want to tie up my oven when I have a bunch of other things to bake for the farmer's market, like cakes and macarons. So they have their own little food dehydrator just for them. And as a bonus, I can't overbake them because the highest the temperature goes is 165. Whereas in the past, I have definitely accidentally set the oven to 300 or 350 and toasted them, which actually still tasted really good. But when you're making snowmen, you want them to stay white, not turn like a delicious toasty marshmallow caramel brown color. Sometimes those are happy little mistakes though, because then you get lots of little snacks. And it would be fun to intentionally make some toasted ones. They're supposed to be kind of a light golden brown for something like bears, maybe little cats or dogs, just not snowmen. We're going to wrap things up with some tails. Tips on those tails. So thank you all for tuning in and joining me today while I pipe these meringues. I appreciate the company. And like I said, I'll be doing tree meringues and campfire meringues tomorrow, same time, 11 a.m. MST. And I hope to see you there. Have a great rest of your day.